Yeah, my name is Eric Pellin. I was born November 8th, 1979. I was actually born in Springdale Memorial Hospital.
Okay. And we have your written permission for this interview,
Mhm.
but we want you to say for the video that we have, you've given us permission to do the
Yeah.
video and to give us some photos.
Yeah, you've got my permission to use my video and photos.
Thank you. Tell me, who are your parents?
Yeah, so my dad's name is Danny Pellin, and my mom's name is Patricia Hartman Pellin.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your parents.
Yeah, so they're both from Tontitown originally. Both can trace their roots back to original settlers of Tontitown.
And your grandparents, first on your dad's side, then on your mom's side.
Yeah, so my dad's dad was Albert Pellin, and his mom was Mary Franco Pellin.
And then on your mom's side?
Yeah, my mom's side was Alma Saganero Hartman, and her dad, my grandfather, was George Hartman.
Okay. So tell me about your family at home. Who are your siblings, or your brothers and sisters?
Yeah, so I've got two older sisters. My oldest sister is Jacqueline Pellin Horton, and then my other sister was Denise Pellin. She passed away 5 years ago.
Okay. And tell me about your family's business or your parents' occupation. What did y'all do for a living at home?
So my parents had a chicken farm at home. My mom stayed at home and was a homemaker and took care of the chickens during the day. And my dad actually set ceramic tile for a company in Fayetteville called Ozark Floor Company.
Okay. And growing up, what did you do to help out in the family business?
Yeah, so during the summer I would go out every morning and help feed and water chickens. Back then we did it by hand. We pulled a hose around and watered each water font for the chickens, and then had a wheelbarrow where we would actually go and hand feed the chickens until a certain age where they could actually eat out of the automatic feeders at that point.
Who'd you guys grow for?
Yeah, so we raised chickens for Tyson Foods.
And what did you do to help your father on his business, the tile setting? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I spent 2 summers when I was in high school setting tile with my dad as his helper, and I remember the first day we went to lunch, or the first day, he loaned me $20 to eat that week, and he said, when you get paid, you can pay me back. And I thought he was kidding, and we get to Friday payday, and he reached his hand out and said, where's my money back? So he taught me pretty early that it was time to earn your way, and hard work pays. And another thing with it was the second summer I turned 16, and I asked him about buying me a car. And he said, when you have $1,500 saved up, you let me know. And we went and bought a car after I saved up the money, and he made me pay for the down payment, and he made me pay for my insurance. And so I learned real quick from him the value of a dollar.
What kind of life lessons, kind of in your own words, how did that help you instead of having it just handed to you? How did that work ethic help you in life?
Well, it helped me in life because I now know what it takes. And when I get my pay every other week, I know not to spend it all right away, that you need to have money set aside for emergencies. And especially with 2 kids at home now, there's always something that they're needing money for, whether it's sports or doctors or anything like that. So it's always good to work hard and have something put away. And I think that's not only through my dad, but everybody here in Tontitown kind of lives off the same idea.
Besides working on the farm and helping your dad, where else did you work? Other jobs you may have worked out when you were growing up for money?
Yeah, so I really didn't work until I got into high school, and then after getting out of high school, I worked for Lehman's Furniture on Emma Street in Springdale, and I worked as a furniture delivery boy, and so I rode around with the guys in the trucks and delivered furniture.
What were the routines at home like? I mean, what was it like on the little farm you had?
Yeah, so the routine at our house was very, very, very regimented, and we did the same things at the same time every day. You know, we'd have to get up and get on the school bus at 6:45, and so everybody would get up. Dad would leave for work about 6:30, so Mom would get up before him and start getting breakfast ready for everybody, and then they would wake me and my sisters up. Mom would get our breakfast, get us dressed, and get us out to the school bus. And when we would get home from the school bus every day, get home around 3:30, 4 o'clock, and we'd come in and get to watch a little bit of TV, eat dinner, watch a little bit more TV, and then right to bed so we could start the next day.
Tell me about your earliest memories of Tontitown. What do you remember the earliest of coming into town?
Yeah, so I remember was the Grape Festival was something that always sticks in my mind because it was the big treat at the end of the year, end of the summer was the Grape Festival, and you always got to come up here. And I remember as a kid coming up, you would come up here early every morning to pick up trash, and when you would pick up trash the mornings of the Grape Festival, you'd get free ride tickets. And so that was kind of my first memory of Tontitown, was always looking forward to the Grape Festival and the hard work and the enjoyment you would get for the hard work.
Where did you live in relation to town? How close were you? And tell me about coming into town, how often you did that.
Yeah, so I grew up about 3 miles from the church here in Tontitown. When I was a kid, you went to town once a week. We didn't leave the house very much, especially in the summertime when all the kids were home. So Friday mornings, we would get up and get everything done around the house, and we'd load up and go to Walmart and pick up our groceries and whatever little other errands had to be ran, and then back to the house because we had chickens to take care of.
When you were a kid in Tontitown in the 80s, where would you shop what stores or places would you trade with here in town?
Yeah, there wasn't much here. There was the Tontitown Mercantile when I was a real little kid. We could go in and get a few things. Wasn't there long, but really we would go into Walmart, and I can remember we'd go downtown Springdale to Ryan's and buy most of our school clothes.
Okay. What about the local restaurants here in town? Would y'all ever go to them?
Yeah, I can remember when I was a kid, there was the hometown drive-in was here in Tontitown where Mama Z's is now, and I can remember after church sometimes we'd stop in there and have a hamburger, and then after Mama Z's opened, we would then start kind of going in there a little bit and have spaghetti, but Mom and Dad made homemade spaghetti and sauce at the house, so we didn't go out for that very often.
Did you live in the same place the whole time in Tontitown? And tell me, you said it was 3 miles out. Kind of describe where it was and describe the farm.
Yeah, so I grew up in a house, like I said, 3 miles from the church. You would go down 412 until you got to Harmon Road, and then you would head south on Harmon Road. Down there about a quarter to half a mile, and then Wildcat Creek Boulevard, you would go to the west. And it was a 2-story white farmhouse. My parents still live there today. There was the house, there was a detached garage. We had 2 chicken houses, and then my dad had a workshop there to keep and store things.
I know for a brief period you attended school in Tontitown. Tell me what you remember about that, and then what it was like switching to a bigger school.
Yeah, so going to school in Tontitown, I went through kindergarten and 1st grade. One thing I remember, I was talking to my mom about this the other day, was when somebody would pass away in the community and they'd need altar servers at the service, your parent didn't call and check you out of school. Nobody would say anything. You would just tell the teacher that morning that you were going to be serving in a funeral, and then chances are, since it was such a small community, they knew the person that had passed away, and you would just leave class and you would walk over to the church. You would serve in mass and go to the cemetery and do all the burial stuff there, and then come back and then walk right back to school. And it was kind of a different thing where, when we moved to Springdale and I would serve in masses, my mom would have to come into Springdale. She'd have to check me out, drive me to the funeral, and then take me back to school when it was over with.
What was it like being the kid from Tontitown going into school at Springdale? I know you said you had to get up early for the bus rides.
Yeah, going to school in Springdale for the Tontitown kids was different because, in Tontitown you knew everybody. The teachers at the Tontitown school, both of my sisters had, and they knew Mom and Dad, and they knew everybody's family. And so kind of going into Springdale was a different thing. A lot of the teachers from Tontitown went to Springdale, but there was a whole lot of new kids, and nobody knew, in Tontitown everybody knew each other, and chances are you were related to those same people. My best friend growing up, and to this day, we're cousins. And we went to school in Tontitown together and all through Springdale High, but it was just it was a little bit not as much of a community feel as there was in Tontitown.
Who are some of the people at Tontitown, maybe some of the city elders that you remember when you were young? That people maybe, not just your neighbors and friends, but people maybe that you knew from the community that you looked up to. Who are some of the ones that stand out? Yeah,
one of the ones that really stands out for me, it was the priest when I was a kid out here, Father Janesco. He was an older priest at the time, and he was pretty strict on the altar servers, but he was always somebody that has always had Tontitown's best interest at heart. And I think a lot of what we have out here today with the new church and the school building and all the different things that we're able to do really was because of him and the sacrifices that he made for us.
You mentioned a lot about church.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the church you went to
Mm-hmm.
and how big a part of your family's life and it was.
Yeah, so we went to the church that was actually just demolished, and that was the original church that I remember going to, which I think was the second or third that was actually built in Tontitown. It was kind of a neat deal where when you walked into church, and it's still the same way in this church here, but a little bit with more people coming in, but everybody always sat in the same pew. You know, everybody always went to the same masses, and if somebody wasn't there, people would question, were they sick? Was there something wrong? Were they out of town? You know, you serve Mass. I serve Mass almost every Saturday night, and I kind of, you know, I knew the routines of when to do things and where everything was at, and even to this day, the last time I went into the church to do something, I still remember where all the light switches were at and where to go in the bell tower to turn on lights, where to turn lights on in the altar, and I still remember walking up and down the aisle and where to go and when to go there and that type of thing.
Who were some of the, I know a lot of people from the community went to the church, but who are some of the ones, maybe the church elders or whatever you would call it, that stand out in your memories of being a real faithful attending or maybe real influential?
Yeah, so somebody that I remember from my youth was Edward Panalto, and he passed away a few years ago, but Edward was always one of the ones, along with my Uncle Roy, who would come up and help pick up trash. They were kind of in charge of the trash pickup, and I always remember Edward when I moved to Springdale. When I turned 21, I was renting a house in Springdale, and every time I would see him after that, he'd always say, "And don't forget to come back to Tontitown and visit us. You've been away too long." And I say, "Edward, I'm just in Springdale," and he'd say, "You need to come back and visit us. Don't forget we're out here." And I always remember Edward saying that.
When you were a young kid growing up around Tontitown, living out in the country, what would you and your friends do for fun?
Yeah, so a lot of bike riding. So my best friend Justin, he grew up about a mile from where I live now, or where my parents live, where I grew up, and we remember getting off the school bus and just getting on our bikes and taking off, and we would meet each other halfway, and we would ride all over Tontitown, and we kind of had our boundaries where our mom said, you can't go past this person's house, you can't go past this road, and you know, in the summer times, we would meet up and we would take off and be gone all day, and we would ride our bikes all over Tontitown, you know, in the area where we grew up.
What did the adults, your parents and their friends, do for fun when you were a kid?
Yeah, so one thing that was always really prevalent in Tontitown that people would do for enjoyment, like on Sundays, I can remember people coming over to the house to visit. And so my parents would sometimes go to other people's houses, and you would just show up unannounced, and you were always welcomed in. I can remember my grandmother would come all the time. My dad's mom, my Nana, would come over on Sundays, and they would drink coffee, and they'd sit in the kitchen and tell stories about stuff that happened when they were younger, and then they'd also talk about current events and what was going on in town.
You'd mentioned earlier about the Tontitown Grape Festival. Tell me about what it was like, how you served first as picking up trash, and then that grew into maybe larger roles over the years until eventually you were the chairman, I think, for a couple times.
Yeah. So growing up in Tontitown, like I said, the Grape Festival was always a big part of my life. It's something that I absolutely love and enjoy doing. So like I said, I started picking up trash every morning. We'd meet up here at 7. And we'd kind of comb through the grounds and pick up all the trash and look for loose change that people might have dropped out of their pockets by some of the games. And you know, did that as long as I could, and then I started working in the bingo, and so I'd go out and sell bingo cards and do things of that nature. Then I moved on to running the wheel for a little bit, and then was asked to be co-chairman. So I was the co-chairman of the 108th Festival, and then the 109th was my first chairman year. And then I began serving on the committee, and then since then I've been chairman 2 other times, most recently the 119th.
Talk about this group of dedicated volunteers you have that year in and year out make the spaghetti, sell the ads, all the many jobs.
Yeah. So the volunteers for the Grape Festival are the heart and soul. And without them, the Grape Festival would not be what it is today. And it starts the day of the festival's over with. We've got the new chairman in place, and he kind of starts making phone calls right away to get things lined up for the next year, making a deal with the carnival to start showing up. And so then we kind of go into kind of a dead period there for a few months where there's not a whole lot that needs to be done. But then, when you get close to Easter time, then it's start time. You got to start looking for queens, and so you start looking. We have some people that work with the queen candidates. They start looking for candidates. We get them settled upon, and then it kind of starts with the spaghetti. So then the volunteers come in July and start making spaghetti. We get all the spaghetti made and put away, and then the week of the festival, the Saturday prior to the festival, everybody shows up and we start getting all of our stuff put out, getting all the stands. And then the real festival for me starts on Thursday. Tuesday and Wednesday is just carnival armbands and rides. It's not really nothing that we do here in Tontitown, but on Thursdays it really starts to move, and all the volunteers start showing up. We start making sauce, and get the dinners ready, and we have the bingo. And so Thursday is really when it starts. So Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, all the volunteers are here. And like I said, without the volunteers, the festival would have not made it as far as it has.
When you were a kid, how many people would eat spaghetti, and then compare that to now? Was it the same? Or
yeah, I mean, we're serving a lot more people out of the hall than we did before. I've only got, I've been involved with the festival for about 15 years, and this year we served 7,500 people in 3 days. And I don't have any of the numbers from 20 years ago, but I can't imagine that we were doing near that. Do they come to eat spaghetti, or why do they come? I think it's tradition. We have a new priest here, Father Connell, and he was asking questions about the dinners and stuff. And I said, one thing that we have here that's really neat is, we have families that will come in. They come the same night every year to eat. We used to come on Thursday nights. My mom's mom, my Nuna Alma, we would come in and we'd all meet and we'd eat. And it's that way for a lot of the other families here in Tontitown. I know I worked in the hall on Friday night, and all the Spinotos came in and all ate together. There was a group of 20, and it's not just the people from Tontitown. I used to work with people when I worked in Springdale, and their families too. They're like, oh yeah, we always go out and eat on Friday nights, or we always go out on Saturday nights. So it's groups of people that just do it. They do it the same way every year because it's a tradition for them, just like the Grape Festival is a tradition for us.
What are some of the other local traditions, if you know of any, besides the Grape Festival is obviously the big one,
Mm-hmm.
but what other things go on here in town?
So some of the other traditions, one that I'm a part of is I make homemade wine with my uncles. And so we actually picked grape this past Saturday. And so every year we pick grape and we make our homemade wine, and they make it the same way that their dad taught them. And I know there's a few other families here in Tontitown that still keep that same tradition alive.
Tell me about your uncles. Who are they, and what all do they raise for grapes?
Yeah, so I make wine with my Uncle Marion and my Uncle Stephen. It's my dad's little brothers. I say little, they're in their 60s now, but we actually pick grape at Andy Penzo's vineyard over on Baker, which is just down the road off of Barrington. And so that's where we've been picking grape for the last few years.
What do you remember Tontitown back in the 80s, 90s, and forward? How has it gone from this little, sleepy suburb of Springdale to now kind of this pretty, busy town?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, 412 was Tulane all the way through Siloam, almost to Tulsa. And in the 90s they kind of started the expansion, and I can remember when I turned 16, I actually drove on the 2-lane road, and then shortly after, it was expanded. And once the highway expanded, then you started seeing more businesses pop up, and in that time there was basically the Hometown Drive-In or Mama Z's now and the Venetian Inn. There wasn't a lot, and now you drive through Tontitown and there's restaurants all over the place. And I talked about how we always went to town on Fridays, and now, town has come to us. There's businesses in Tontitown that you can go and get almost everything you need from. There's a Harp's grocery store just up the road, and a Walmart not too far from there.
What are some of the more significant businesses? There's been a lot of them come out, too many to mention, but some of the ones that stand out in your memory.
Yeah, so I mean, the big standout, I guess, would be the Venetian Inn. You know, it's been here the longest, and you know, it shows no sign of slowing. Mama Z's, I think, would be second to that. You know, they've been open since the 80s as well, and you know, you can go by there on Friday and Saturday nights, and there's not a spot in the parking lot for a car.
What else can you think of? Maybe there's some things that I haven't thought to ask about.
Yeah. So one thing maybe that really sticks to me is my Beesnunna, my great grandmother, who was actually the last surviving settler of Tontitown. I can remember when I was a kid. She was still alive, and she was living with my Nunna now, my grandmother, in the home where her dad built when they came to Tontitown. And I can remember sitting in her room with her, and she would pray the rosary in Latin. And she would pray it over and over again, and almost to the point where she would wear her rosary beads out. They were so smooth from her running them through her fingers. But I can remember, you know, they talked a lot about the hardships of Italy and why they moved to America. And they used to ask her, "Mama, do you want to go back?" And she said, "I didn't leave anything there." And so, you know, they made Tontitown their home. They made America their home because of that.
Tell me more about her as a person. What was she like to her friends and neighbors?
Yeah, she was, you know, by the time I got to really know her, she lived in California for a long time with my aunt, and then she moved back, and she was bedridden. But I can remember she had 5 daughters, and she had nicknames for all of the daughters. And as I would be sitting in there talking to her, and I would hold her hand while she would pray the rosary, and her eyesight was bad, and one would come through, and she'd say, "Who was that?" And I would tell her who they were, and she'd say, "Oh, that's my favorite." And then another one would come through, and she'd say, "Who was that?" And I'd tell her, and she'd go, "Oh, the hawk." And I can't remember who she called who, but she had little nicknames for all of her daughters.
So tell me, who were her daughters, if you remember?
Yeah, so it would be my grandmother, Alma Hartman. There was Aunt Catherine, Aunt Madeline, Aunt Lillian, who we called Aunt Annie because of the way that my uncle pronounced her name when she was little, and then Aunt Eileen. I think that was it. Nunna, Aunt Catherine, Aunt Madeline, Eileen, yeah.
Do you remember, what about Bochy? Was that ever a big deal when you were a kid?
Oh yeah. So there was the men would always meet at the park in Tontitown here and play Bochy every day at noon. I never did go up there. My dad worked out, so he never did go up there and play. But I can remember a time or two going up there with some friends, and their dad would go up there and play, and they'd kind of let us run wild in the park back then and do what we wanted, and the men would play Bochy. And I remember I had went up to the Bochy court one time when I was in my teens to ask somebody up there a question about something actually with the museum. And I remember one of the old men said, "Did you come to play?" And I said, "No, I've got somewhere else I've got to be." He said, "Well, you need to start coming up here. We're starting to die off. There's not enough of us to play anymore."
Who are some of the ones you remember playing Bochy?
Yeah, so I remember playing Bochy would be my Uncle Pete. He was up there always. Uncle Jill, who was married to my Aunt Eileen, who was my grandmother, my Nunna's sister. And Riley Tesoro was up there quite a bit, so I remember those guys.
And we talked earlier about the growth of the town.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the residential developments or some of the other developments you remember as kind of being a big deal out here? Any of them?
Oh gosh, I mean, not offhand. I just know, you know, when the houses started popping up, you know, for years everybody knew where everybody lived, and then, you know, all of a sudden here comes all the houses, and we had the, you know, the bubble burst in 2008, and it's kind of looked like we've rebounded now, and there's, you know, there's houses going up all over the place now.
If somebody who'd never been to Tontitown, let's say maybe somebody from your work said, "Tell me about your little hometown of Tontitown. What's it like?" What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell people, what I tell people about Tontitown is I was lucky enough to be raised in Tontitown, and I think that I probably had the best childhood of anybody around, and I share that with everybody that grew up in Tontitown. You know, it was a laid-back community, a faithful community, one that was surrounded by family and friends all the time, And that's one of the reasons that I really work real hard with the Grape Festival, is I want to see that tradition continue to go, because I want my children to experience the same things that I experienced, you know, coming up here and working with the people, picking up trash and getting to know people in a different way. You know, if it wouldn't have been for my involvement in that, or my involvement with, you know, the church, I wouldn't have these relationships that I've got today, and people that I consider friends and family that, you know, really aren't blood related, but they're all family now.
You could live anywhere in the world, or at least anywhere around here, I guess, if you wanted to, and have your job. Somebody might, if they ask you, this is sort of the same thing, but why Tontitown? What would you tell them?
Yeah, the reason I want to live in Tontitown is because I can trace my roots to here. You know, my family came from Italy, but like I said earlier, they didn't leave anything there, and they needed to go somewhere that was a better life. And so Tontitown is a place that I know that my ancestors came in and made the best of what they had, and made it the absolute best that they could, for not just themselves, but also for, you know, generations to come, my generation, my children, my children's children.
Okay, and finally, finish the sentence for me.
Okay.
My favorite thing about Tontitown is
family. It's knowing that you can go anywhere in Tontitown and you can see somebody you're related to, and it might be somebody you saw 10 minutes ago, or it might be somebody you haven't seen in a year, but you're always going to see somebody you know. I know when I started dating my wife, we would go out to a restaurant and I would say hi to somebody, and she'd say, "Who is that?" And I say, "Oh, it's my cousin." "Oh, that's my cousin." And she would always say, "You're related to everybody. Just because you think they're your cousin doesn't mean they're family." And I said, "Yeah, they're family, because we're all from Tontitown."